First off, welcome. Really appreciate people taking time out of their busy schedules, and special appreciation to LiquidHub.io for partnering with us to turn around and facilitate this. My name is Norm Balchunas, and I have kind of dual hats here at Drexel. I'm a research professor working in the Applied Informatics group, and then I've had the privilege to be able to stand up our Cybersecurity Institute and to be working across university to be able to get this started. And we really have 4 goals associated with the Cybersecurity Institute. One is, as a research university, we want to be able to turn around and continue to refine education, especially in the area of cybersecurity and the offerings that we have, and then extend that also out to professional development. So as we build relationships with industry partners, for ongoing education, co-op opportunities, and then job placement, we want to be able to develop those networks. Obviously, we want to be able to then also develop sponsorship and research opportunities, so we can continue to push the edge, especially in cybersecurity. And then last, and what's most important to this group, is to develop the relationships amongst an industrial community and amongst the Philadelphia community at large. So, so much of this has been done. And my background's in the military. It's been behind that green door, and we didn't share a whole lot of information. And frankly, that's what's also taken place for the last decade or so. There's not a whole lot of information was shared. And now we're all reaching a point where, as a community, we got to come together. And we've done that to identify specific critical infrastructures and develop the relationships within them. But there's a lot of businesses that are falling outside of those specific groups. So how can we turn around and partner and support one another, and especially be doing that, especially be walking out of Philadelphia, as a networked, forward-looking, city, to be able to turn around and attract other businesses and opportunities here. So that's really the goals that we have with the Institute. But it's really my privilege then to be able to turn around and introduce our moderator for today. In getting to know Mark, I would assume that all of you play baseball with his son's team. It's kind of an inside joke, because if we started talking around, he's kind of like, well, I know this guy, and he's got this, and he coaches with my son's team.
Yeah.
But real pleasure to have Mark jump in this. He's a Drexel alumnus, started at Penn State, and then got his MS degree here at Drexel. Healthcare background, insurance background with Cigna, and then started his own business and several partners there, NetDiligence. And I'll let him give a little brief background on what he's doing there. But he really brings a lot of energy, and he's got a lot of passion for this topic. And I knew that he was going to dive into both the relationships that he, for folks that he's got here on the panel, but then really from this perspective of penetration testing, be asking some tough questions. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to him at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. I just want to start saying thank you to Drexel and Norm for quarterbacking this. I'm honored to be here. I was blown away when Lois reached out to me about a month or 2 ago and asked me to speak at a similar event up in New York for Drexel. And it's neat to see a school I went to now diving into cybersecurity. I come at it a little bit differently than just cybersecurity. I talk about cyber risk. And the difference is we specialize in working for insurance companies around the world. It's all the household name companies you heard of, AIG, Chubb, Zurich, Lloyd's of London. We work for about 50 insurance companies. And they insure businesses against cyber risk, cyber liability, hacker risk. There's a million different names. You see Target in the paper getting pummeled. They had insurance, luckily, for their event. May not be enough. It's probably going to be $1 billion loss for them. But those are the insurance companies who we work for, and we try to help their customer gauge whether their security and privacy practices are reasonable, just given the size and scope of what they're doing. The other thing is, it's not always about the bad guy breaking into the network for us, the actual security. It's really about the responsible management of private information that the company has. It could be, we see lawsuits, class action lawsuits, because the staffer just leaked out 1 million records, Social Security numbers. Or we see a guy leave a laptop unencrypted on a train, had $500,000 protected health records on it. And I would say more times than not, we see class actions resulting from the innocent, non-malicious mistakes. My company will do an annual claim study with the insurance industry. We'll go around, we have to break arms to get this data from the different claims departments, but we collect about 150 claims a year. And these are things they paid out for because companies like Target had a penetration and they had to pay out on a lawsuit. They had to pay out on forensics and security remediation. And I do it for free with my guys because I'm interested in learning how often does this actually happen? And then once it happens, what's the severity? And right now there's really no good empirical data out there showing companies that. There's a lot of guesstimates out there, and I think the best way to get that is from our insurance partners, and that's what I'm trying to tap into. So today, luckily I invited a couple of my friends and hopefully a new friend here, George with Comcast. Vinny I've known for years, I'll give him an intro in a minute, and I know Brian for a decade as well. Tremendous speakers and great backgrounds, and I think today is going to be really cool. At a high level, we want to really talk about cloud risk, because it's a hot topic for every insurance company I'm working for and every company and bank and business and college they insure. All of them are using cloud. I got tired of hearing the word cloud a few years ago because it's such a buzzword, and none of the customers we assessed the risk were concerned about it yet. Everybody now is using the cloud and putting meaningful information in there, and with that comes a tremendous amount of risk. They completely lose sight of the fact that cloud contracts are so one-sided to the point where the cloud will say, if we screw up, you agree to defend and indemnify us for our screw up. If you put your data in our SaaS model, we might not have a duty now to tell you about a future data breach event. Major implications. Our customer is the CFO, sometimes the CIO, but the CFO very often, because he's buying the insurance to protect the company against a future class action lawsuit because they had anemic security in place. So this is some of the cloud is very much on the mind of the insurers we work for. The other really big reason is you could have these 50 insurers and they could have 1 million customers all using the same cloud. And if that Amazon or that Salesforce goes down, there's basically a nationwide earthquake loss for them overnight. They're going to have a zillion claims. So they're very much worried about what are clouds doing that are good, what are they doing that's bad, where is their aggregation pockets for them. The other topic we want to weave into this discussion is mobile risk. Another topic, because everybody's walking around now with these many computers in their hand. A lot of companies aren't good at managing all the risks that come with that. So mobile device in general, Vinny's got some awesome topics on that because his company tests mobile apps. We wanted to talk about mobile apps and mobile device in general. So with that, I'm going to give some introductions. Vinny, I'm not going to read your bio.
Yeah,
Vinny's a longtime security and privacy expert. He works with ICSA Labs in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. ICSA Labs is owned by Verizon. Vinny wears multiple hats for Verizon. He specializes in the HIPAA healthcare privacy side of things for Verizon, and as well on ICSA Labs, he's their cloud expert. So we're going to get some great insight from Vinny on those topics. Brian, I'm going to read your bio, George, but I'm going to just go Brian, I know by heart. Brian, longtime banking security expert with Liberty Bell Bank in New Jersey, basically he was their CIO and chief security officer. I met Brian about a decade ago. I'm a member of InfraGard in Philadelphia, which is if you're not familiar, it's a great group. It's run by the FBI to study cybercrime, and they have about 1,200 members in Philadelphia. Really, just private companies become members. And Brian's a recent past president, and he sees just a tremendous side of fraud and abuse and true computer crime that I never see. And the insights he brings I find it fascinating, and all our insurance partners love it. George, we were lucky enough to get linked up with George, as Norm joked about baseball contact. A father I work with happened to introduce me to Comcast CIO, who introduced me to George. George is Senior Director of Comcast Security Response Center within Comcast National Engineering and Technical Operations under the Capable Business Unit. He's responsible for 24/7 tactical eyes on glass cybersecurity, monitoring and incident response for all of Comcast and NBCU services. George has 20 years of experience in security operations and IT audit functions, and he's a graduate of Rutgers University. Thank you again, George, for being here. This is a small group, and I like that because you get the best questions in these kind of settings. My company, we host 2 annual conferences a year, and one in June. We have 400 or 500 people show up, and it's intimidating for people to truly ask the questions sometimes. So this kind of setting is perfect. So what I ask these guys, I would just love it if you guys stop us in our tracks, raise your hand, and I'd love to get questions from you just as we go here. This is informal. I got some questions for each of these guys based on their backgrounds that I think would be of interest in the topic of cloud and mobile risk, but I wanted to start out with a high-level scenario just to get the ball rolling here. And then I want each of them to comment on this because they have different perspectives that they're looking at. But I put together this scenario with Norm just to speculate there's a major healthcare provider, and healthcare is like the amount of lawsuits this industry is seeing now because of the HIPAA High-Tech Act, the amount of attorney generals coming after any kind of healthcare related entity for the smallest of breaches with significant penalties. It's astonishing anymore. So we wanted to pick on this sector for this example. They're managing patient records, e-records. They're trying to launch an EMR system, and they strive to also comply with the many federal and state mandates that require reasonable and prudent security in place. And that is easier said than done, especially for the smaller guys. So part of the scenario is they want to leverage the cloud in deploying their operations. Everybody wants to use the cloud because it's cheaper, supposedly easier, and in some cases I think that's true for the smaller, medium-sized guy, but with that comes a lot of issues, and that's what I want to pull out from these guys. To complicate things, we also want to say this cloud provider, this healthcare sector customer is now launching their own new mobile app, and I can't believe the amount of mobile apps now that companies are deploying with horrible security around the app. They're developed by third parties, and Vinny, I don't want to steal your thunder, third parties all over the country with no understanding of actual security. They're good at developing it, and it might functionally work, but it leaks data. It can actually send data to bad guys. So there's all these risks come with it. So with that, I'm going to start, Vinny, I'd like to start with you. I want to break that down into two parts. Just let's comment on the cloud side of things for the healthcare sector and e-records management. What would be some of the security and privacy exposures that come to your mind?
Sure. Everyone, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here. Prior to joining Verizon and ICSA Labs, I'd been part of 4 startups, so I've worked in incubators and these types of situations, and so I think this is a great facility. Lois, I love what you've done here with how you set this up, and I was able to go take a quick look at the space downstairs, so I think this is going to be just a great place for innovation to happen. With that though, so I come from an interesting background. So I ran a software as a service company, one of my startups. We had about 15 people in the organization. It was a data analytics type of application. This was back before cloud was the buzzword. And we had all of the data from the 6 largest health systems in the US. So we had over 100 million records of unique patients from across the US. So my little $5 million company with 15 of us programmers and technologists, we had 1/3 of the US population's medical information. Okay, I had no clue. I couldn't even spell HIPAA right when we started with it. Okay? And I still joke with people that that I just the way you find a HIPAA expert is you just find somebody who can spell the word right. Because everybody puts 2 P's in there. Bill Gates puts 2 P's in there. If you run it through spell check, Microsoft will change it from HIPAA to HIPPA. And so it's just that's one of the biggest issues is just the domain knowledge. There's a lot of regulations that are specific to healthcare, and so if you're going to outsource to the cloud, you run around a couple things. And the first thing is, if you're that health system, one of the areas that OCR, which is the Office of Civil Rights, they're the ones that are going to investigate if there's a breach. And when you pick up I guess we don't pick up newspapers anymore, but when you grab your iPad and you're looking at the morning news blogs, you'll see the latest breach that somebody got fined. Well, that entity, OCR, what they do now is they focus really closely on your vendors. So if I'm that health system, I want to make sure I do a really good job picking that cloud vendor, okay? And so you want to be prepared to ask those questions. So things like security assessments, you should have an assessment that you're going to do on your vendor. So if you're a technology developer, you should be ready to engage on the other side of that equation. So they're going to ask questions like, what are your security practices? Do you use encryption? Encryption is the first question that I think we ask. And with cloud, that's one of the biggest challenges is, okay, if you're going to leverage a cloud provider and there's encryption, who's going to manage the keys. Does everybody understand what I mean by that when I say managing the keys? Basically, it's who's got the key that's going to unlock the data, right? And there's some cloud providers, because of the technology, they have to manage the keys. And so what you've done is you picked a vendor that has access to your patient information, that critical information, okay? The other point I'll make about cloud is that, and I always give this example, so when I used to live in State College and I loved to garden. And I've got 4 daughters, so Mark and I did not meet at a baseball game. I don't know, ever since, since I've had kids, I've only been to one baseball game. It was an Iron Pigs game in Allentown. But so I garden, and I was talking to my daughter. We were trying to, I look at things from a security perspective. So we were having a conversation about how we're going to keep rabbits out of our garden. Okay, and I said to her, here's the secret to keeping a rabbit out of your garden. You need to go look around at everybody else's garden and just make sure that our fence is better than theirs. As long as we make it harder to get into our garden than our neighbors, they're going to figure it out and they're going to go attack the neighbors. And that's one of the first principles of cybercrime. Okay, if you're a criminal, you're not going to go after Fort Knox. Okay, so that's one of the advantages with cloud is that they build Fort Knox. A lot of these cloud data centers they're monstrous. They've got layers and layers and layers of security. And the other way you want to look at it is you have to constantly be walking around and just check your fence to make sure there aren't holes in there. I think that's what George's specialty is. He runs a SOC, and you need to, and Brian too, is you need to know that you're checking those fences from on a regular basis. And that's why I think cloud is a great technology, because a lot of companies have healthcare entities, they're in the business of healthcare, okay? They're there to save lives, treat patients. Their number one mission is not keeping a cyber criminal out, okay? And it's a hard model to secure, and so that's a great area where you would want to look at.
Let me just stop you real quick, so just to dig into it. What I hear from some CFOs, CIOs, and the insurance guys who insure them is clouds outsource to clouds.
Yep.
And that complicates matters for them. You're right. You're doing due diligence on your cloud provider A, but you don't know about their 10 other clouds those clouds rely on.
Right.
Trying to find the bandwidth to actually do that kind of level due diligence, that's challenge number one.
Yep.
The other issue I keep hearing about is they're worried about segmentation of your data. Just the cloud technology itself, they question whether your data is truly segmented from the 100 other companies sharing the same logical infrastructure.
Yeah.
And could a company insider or outsider traverse that to get access to your information?
Yeah, and cloud technology is generally pretty good. Without getting into the nitty-gritty details, there haven't been major successful attacks against what's called the hypervisor, which is what runs the cloud. But Mark makes a great point. You don't know the real security risks are once you give your information to a cloud, you've lost control. Okay, and that's the issue. You don't know where your data is going. How many of you here use Gmail or Yahoo Mail or whatever? Okay, how many of you know exactly where your email is being stored? If you're on a cross-country flight, you may start here in Pennsylvania and you may end up in San Francisco. You check your email in San Francisco, you may be hitting a server that's in Canada. You know what I mean? And so you don't really know that where that information is. And so it's important that when you investigate and you pick a cloud service that you ask tough questions, you really do that assessment. That's the one thing that I tell everybody from a security standpoint. You have to know the business practices of the people that you're trusting. And that famous, saying trust but verify. And with cloud providers, some of them are really stubborn, but you know what? You have to, if they're not willing to give you information, maybe they're not the right cloud provider for you. And that's a challenge.
George, Comcast's position on cloud partners or what you're seeing right now?
I come from a couple different perspectives. I actually have looked at cloud partners even for some of the security things that we're looking to potentially do off-prem. So for us, we actually run our X1 platform on a cloud, internal cloud and a private cloud as well. So it's actually been new for us in the last year of how do we go about trying to sustain the security posture of the company that we do within our own infrastructure somewhere else. One of the big key things, and I know it was mentioned here, is that security assessments. There needs to be transparency from your cloud partners. You really need to understand their security posture. They need to understand from you what are your expectations. And what I like to see in the contracts for sure is a little bit more granular detail where we could get our lawyers to commit and agree on the key security controls that we would like them to have, the kind of certifications from standard bodies out there, ISO 2701 or other cloud-specific standards that are out there. And I don't want to see that just at the beginning when I'm building the relationship. I actually want to see that sustain over time. If you're doing these reviews every 6 months or a year, I want to be able to get at that information regularly. On top of that, I like to have the ability to come in and do an independent assessment ourselves or through a trusted third party to come in and we'll give them the scope of work and the kind of granular details that we'd like to. And then I've always been concerned about the bundling. You've mentioned the bundling of data. I know in the times we've talked to vendors about cloud security, we've actually have sometimes said, hey, we want our own dedicated instance in your environment rather than being bundled with others. And some of our legal folks has actually have asked for that. They don't trust, even when we tell them as security professionals, hey, there are some level of controls that we're comfortable with, yet they still want a segregated pod.
Do you get any pushback when you ask for an audit, on-site audit or whatever? Do they? I mean, you're Comcast. You could probably demand things more than others, but do you get that pushback at all?
There are some pushbacks.
Yeah.
Some companies are more transparent than others, so I've noticed that in the industry. It could be because of experience. But the ones that I think that are very customer focused are open about their security posture, their situation. They're willing to give you those reports. They're willing to meet with you regularly.
Yeah.
In our case, we even ask for specific governance type metrics that we would have in-house if we run the environment. Hey, I like to see these on a monthly or whatever basis. Like to see those reports coming back to us.
Yeah.
And some of them work with you, others are not willing to work with you, and you got to decide, all right, who do I trust?
Yep. Brian, you come from the banking sector.
Yep.
Oh,
I just want to ask George,
yes, Steve.
do you find sometimes that when you kind of demand that individual pod of your own, or you kind of end up decloudifying the cloud at that point, and you lose the economies of scale that you would otherwise get by putting your stuff out there in the first place, by saying I'm a special flower, I belong in my own spot? Or does that not end up being a problem?
So far, it hasn't been only
Okay.
because we always price it, and we have tough negotiators in our finance world. And being Comcast, we come in and say, hey, this is the price point we're looking at, but we want these specific customizations to that program.
Okay.
One of the key things I did want to mention, because I work on the incident response side, I like to always bake into the contract the notification. If there is a breach, within 24 hours of confirmation, you have to contact us. It's our data, our information. In some cases, we're the ones responsible for any external reporting that needs to take place. So I need to know quickly, and I need to be engaged in the actual incident investigation.
Hopefully they abide by that.
Most do, and that's why you got to get in the contract.
Yeah.
So and what George mentioned is, I'm telling you how crucial this is to the insurance industry. I've seen this play out now. Fortune 50 major cloud provider, everybody knows, had a major breach, and they were hosting everything for a major hotel chain. They let them know about this breach 6 months later. And they're already triggered. 47 states have laws that say you have to notify us, and many of them have penalties if it's beyond a certain date. They open themselves up to a massive amount of liability. That customer, because of them not willing to let them know in a timely way about this breach. And we see many customers right now. We host a site called eRisk Hub where they report in breaches for the insurance industry, and we direct them to experts, top lawyers who can help them. We call those lawyers breach coaches. Many times that client hits the breach coach. The breach coach says, you have XYZ duty. You have to forensically investigate this. You have to start notifying these victims right away. You leaked Social Security numbers, and they just go away. The customer just goes away. They do nothing because their reputation is on the line. And this is shocking. And that's why I think the federal government is actually talking about a new breach law that's basically saying jail time for willful non-disclosure. Brian, on banking, you come from a strong banking background. They're seeing same issues as healthcare with the cloud side. Let's just stick with the cloud for now. Give us some insight of what you're seeing.
Well, to your point on the breach law, I've audited this last year 30 or 40 banks, and not a single one had mentioned breach law in their policy or procedure and how to notify or handle that, which is extremely scary. And when I mention it to them, they think I'm lying to them about it. It's like, no, breach law, I was talking about. But as far as cloud's concerned, banking is very conservative, as you know, and bankers, we boldly go where everybody's been before. So you kind of tiptoeing things. So cloud involvement largely has been low-risk systems, mail, maybe some HR function, things like that. We're just now seeing some maturity in that space where the core, the brains of the banks are actually allowing banks to look into a private cloud scenario, which is it's great from the economy to scale and things like that. But there's a lot of risk involved. And one of the other challenges you see when you have like a big application like that, the IT guys they get all pumped up, project money, let's go. But they don't get involved, the risk management folks at all, to figure out whether we should be doing this at all. And what you had is, I just had one the other day, I got a panic call from the risk management department, regional bank, where they're going to roll out a fairly significant system that it exposes some data, and they just called risk manager like 2 days before they're rolling the system out. And it's everybody's what they're panicking about. So what we're finding and recommending going out is, hey, listen, get risk manager involved from day one. They're not as uptight as you may think. You give them some food and stuff like that. Get them involved in the conversation, because they're gonna, if they have the right insight. And what I try to bring is, from my background, I'm a techie guy that's grown into a business side. And we built the bank from scratch. So here's a tech guy that's writing policies and applications to the FDIC and things like that. Kind of a rare combination, but that's kind of what you need. You need somebody that can bridge that gap on both sides, especially when you're dealing with cloud things. You ask a regulator, the cloud is nebulous to them too. They'll put out a memo once in a while talking about it, but they don't have a complete understanding of what that means, other than the regurgitated checklist of things they want the regulators to come out and ask you about, which is, again, a scary thing. But on top of what we already heard, which is great points, the vendor management is ginormous, for lack of a better word. I mean, the review of the SSE 16s, which replaced the SAS 70s, if you're familiar with that audit standard, is huge. You just can't check off a box anymore. You have to read these things and make sure you understand what the risk is for that provider, especially on the cloud side. And when you're dealing with a cloud vendor or somebody external like that, you got to make sure that they know what they're talking about. I think George referred to it. That knowledge, industry knowledge of that particular vendor is important, especially when you're multi-homing inside of one environment. If that guy doesn't have the right certifications or understand what the alphabet soup of regs are, GLBA, SOX, FFIEC, they don't understand what that means to a banker or regulatory stuff, you're in big trouble when the auditors come in. You don't have a checklist or the proper documentation to support that. Again, scarily, a lot of banks don't have it. I mean, what we see is banks largely outsource. And when I come in, I start talking zeros and ones a little bit. I get that glazed, 10,000 mile stare, and I lose them. So I got to reel them back in. And listen, you will go to jail. You will be fined millions of dollars if you don't pay attention to these points. And then I reel them back in. Oh, okay. You got to talk money. So it's really important. Also, when you're talking cloud, where the data is huge. How it's getting there is important as well. How it's stored is important. In transit, storage, where it's housed. Vinny made the point of Canada. Do I really want my banking data to be held in another country? Does that make sense? I would say no. But those are questions you have to ask of the company you're dealing with. And lastly, the public company aspect is another huge piece we're finding out that's really bubbling up. If your bank is SOX regulated, they're a public company, they have standards to adhere to. And you have external auditors to kind of, you have to answer to. And a lot of these challenges with the external auditors, they don't have an understanding either of this. You get a kid out of college who just graduated, top of his class or whatever. Yeah, he's great at reading a checklist, but he does not understand how business works. So what we're finding is they're super stringent on those regs that the bank can't operate. They can't service their customers in the cloud environment, internet banking. It's, simple thing is, I had a debate with no offense to anybody who's 20-something. He wanted to lock down passwords so bad that the client would be locked out after 1 or 2 attempts, and they could not get to their money. I said, you don't understand. Do you have any money in the bank? What if I told you couldn't get to your bank account? Would you be a little upset at that? Yeah. So you got to, I'm hoping at Drexel, in these opportunities, we can send that message out to the new practitioners. Hey, listen, learn about the business as well as the technology. It's really important. You just can't have that checklist mentality.
Yeah, and that's a really good tension that Brian described, the tension between technology and security. Because especially with passwords, I mean, passwords, most breaches occur because of passwords. Either someone does a phishing attack or they break in and get passwords. And so in the security world, we always talk about multi-factor authentication, where you have a password, but then you either use your fingerprint or an eye scan or some kind of token, something additional. When you're on a mobile phone, most apps are written to get rid of that stuff so you can quickly get to things. And that's a really, when you're in security, that's a really tough thing. And the other thing that Brian mentioned that I just want to chime in on is when he was talking about vendors. The other thing about the cloud is you don't know who else is in that cloud. I mean, if you find out that you're in the same area as the CIA, I can tell you you're getting hacked.
Yeah.
At least people are trying. So who your neighbors are really matters. And
Well, that's on that point, Vinny. I'm going to get to the denial of service attack, which George has got some expertise in it. But we had a client who was on a cloud who was under massive denial of service attack, and the cloud basically booted them off. They were such a target. They got tired of them. They booted them off. And you mentioned vendors. So the claim study I mentioned, what we do the insurance industry, I would say 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 attacks on your company and losses is going to be caused by one of your service providers, upstream or downstream from you.
Yeah.
Somebody who touches your infrastructure or somebody who is in a care, custody, and control of your data. It's just proven across the whole insurance industry. Yeah, Austin.
On the breach topic, all you guys are doing a great job. If you think about a lot of smaller customers, I know George is a big company, but you trust your data to the cloud, and you actually are getting low prices. The price has gone to the floor. But what do you think of the fact that the number one target of APTs, advanced persistent threats, is server data, and also that if you have a breach and your information is shared on a box with somebody else, sometimes you can't even do forensics with that because you now are actually going to have access through your forensics team post-breach to somebody else's data. So I want to get you guys thought on that, on the vulnerabilities of putting things in the cloud.
Yeah, so here's the way that I look at it, Austin. So not all cloud providers are created equal. Okay, and one of the things you want to do is when you pick your cloud provider, I like to ask 2 questions. I like to ask, how big is your security team? And if they struggle with the question, they're not the cloud provider for me. I want a cloud provider that has a team. Like, George runs a team that manages security. Okay, and that will help me sleep at night. Okay, and so you want to make sure that the cloud provider has a security team. And then the second thing you want to ask is you want to ask not what standards they meet. Do they meet HIPAA, or do they meet I think GLBA and Sarbanes-Oxley, which affects Brian's industry. But you want to ask them, okay, beyond the compliance stuff, what additional things do you do from a security standpoint? Like, what do you do from a security standpoint? And you want to get a good feel. And if I'm a small company, Austin, to be honest, I'm going to hire a consultant to help me pick a cloud vendor. Because unless I know that stuff myself, I'm gonna pay a little bit more, bring somebody in, and have them sit down as they're doing the reviews. Maybe help write an RFP or review the responses. But you make a great point. At the end of the day, there's 2 things you will know. One, when you get to a good cloud provider, you'll know that they have a bigger security infrastructure than you do. And then 2, they're monitoring it all the day. I remember one time I went to a large cloud provider on the West Coast, and I asked them about denial of service attacks, and they just started laughing. And it made me feel so good, because the reason why they're laughing is they're like, we get hit with thousands of those on a daily team. We have a team of guys that manage it. And that's what I wanted to hear. I didn't want a guy Googling DDoS, looking it up. I wanted somebody who knew what it was and just laughed at the threat.
Well, actually, on that topic, I want to pivot to you, George. Denial of service attack falls outside a little bit of, we're talking about the cloud right now, but in some ways it's related. We work with a vendor in the U.S. Cub called DOS Arrest out of Vancouver. And the horror stories we hear from them, they basically help clients prevent denial of service attacks. And they talk about these million slave computers coming after their clients, pummeling them where their ISP just kicks them off. They can't take it anymore. So tell me what you're seeing with regard to Comcast. And
we actually have a unique perspective being the largest ISP here in the United States. So we do see here in 2004 a 5x, 6x increase in denial of service attacks. The vast majority of them so far this year have been NTP, so 45% are the NTP vulnerabilities that are out there that people are trying to take advantage of. We're uniquely positioned in that most times we're not the direct target because folks need us to transport the packets off to wherever they're targeting. But our subscribers, small, medium-sized businesses, and our residential folks are sometimes the target, or in some cases, unfortunately, because they are botted, they actually are participating in the DDoS events. So for us, you know, if I were to use a cloud service, I probably would even be asking them, hey, you have to peer off the Comcast network because we do have visibility and we have mitigation, detection capability and auto mitigation of DDoS attacks. So we can just send the clean traffic back via GRE tunnels. So that's what I would be looking for. You know, I would hope that your companies are trying to do the same thing. The pricing in that area, I know is changing. It's getting more competitive. We're joining that real soon. I know Verizon's already doing it. So be on the lookout for that, or you're going to have increased bandwidth to try to sustain some of those large attacks.
So, I mean, so George is getting into denial of service attack from a lot of clients we work with, be it the CIO, CFO, or the underwriter, the insurer at AIG. They're worried about losing $10 million because the network was down for 2 days, you know, being brought down, and the insurance actually responds to that. That's considered a first-party risk. You're losing revenue per minute, per hour for something like that. It's beyond common now. The only reason we're hearing about all these breaches is, I mentioned earlier on, there's 47 state laws that require companies, compel them to notify. Many just ignore that. But there's no law requiring them to notify you that they were just brought down from a denial of service attack. And that just gets swept under the carpet constantly. So part of an assessment, we do assessments, we definitely ask how are you protecting, safeguarding data, but then also how are you safeguarding your network, your perimeter, protecting yourselves against denial of service attacks, which is just beyond common right now. Every company's seeing it. And you mentioned how home users' computers are being botted and used. We see companies' networks being botted and used. Tremendous upstream liability for them when it's traced back to them.
That's right.
So
now we help our subscribers. You're off our net and we know that you are infected. We do have a customer security assurance team that will reach out to them. We participate in different organizations where we share information, including sometimes with law enforcement, and have them do the reach out where necessary, or do whatever it is they want to do to help capture some of the actors that are participating in those events.
And let's go to mobile. Now,
Sure.
I know you have a lot of background on there. We can talk about mobile devices, the iPhone risk, or especially the 8 zillion mobile apps out there, not only that kids use, that every business now deploys. And what we're seeing is leaking data left and right. Developers they don't really know about who developed the data, who developed the actual app. Tell me, you had some horror stories at ICSA Labs.
So I put together a short list of topics that I thought were important. So how many of you have a smartphone with apps on it? Well, how many of you have an Android device? Raise your hand. Okay, and how many of you have an Apple iOS device? Okay. So what I'm going to share applies to both of those. If you have something else, it probably applies as well, but these are the two areas that I really focus on. So the first thing is, you know, if anybody do any banking or buying on your phone? Okay. I'm addicted to Amazon. So if they have an Amazon's Anonymous group, I gotta be there. I mean, there's a good chance on the way home I'm going to buy something on Amazon. I can't stop myself. I bought my daughter a tennis racket yesterday, you know, and so, you know, it's one of those things where we do a lot of transactions now over the phone. And here's some interesting things that we've learned, because we test these apps. First thing is, very rarely does the company who has the app, do they develop it? They usually pay somebody else to develop it. That's a challenge, because you've got developers and they may not be security experts. They don't know your business and they don't necessarily know that. So we always tell people, test your apps, because you need to do it. Okay. Anybody ever you play Angry Birds or any of those? Download the free app that has the advertising on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a group in Russia. We called it the Bad News app. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but there was a team of cyber criminals in Russia that wrote application code so that if you write a mobile app and you want to get advertising stuff, you just grab this code and you throw it in your mobile app. I think there was something like 700,000 apps that used it. What that code was doing, it was siphoning all of your personal information off your phone and sending it to them in Russia. Okay. And so we called it bad news. And so that's the first challenge, is you have developers that aren't part of the company doing it, and if you don't security test it, you may not know that. So that's kind of the first area of security risk. The second is the information that's actually being taken. Okay, so there's this great report out by App Authority. They analyzed the top 100 Android apps, the top 100 Apple apps. Okay, so these are the most downloaded apps. They've all been through the iPhone store. They've all been through the Android store. We're talking millions and millions of people are using these 100 apps. Okay, a majority of the apps were accessing your contacts. They were accessing your location data. They were accessing your calendar. Why Amazon needs to know about my calendar? I'm just using that disclaimer. I'm not saying Amazon does that, but I'm using them as an example. Why an app is accessing my calendar, I have no idea. Okay, it isn't necessary. And in healthcare, they have this law. Part of the law, they say minimum necessary, where you only grab what the absolute minimum what's necessary. That doesn't really fit with the app world. They tend to just grab everything. Okay, and so that's that's the other aspect of this, is these apps aren't always secure, and they're just grabbing information. Okay, app stores, right? Most of you, when I had an Android device, this was how I determined whether an app was a good app. I looked at the number of downloads. I said, okay, if 5 million people downloaded this app, it must be an okay app. I had no other options. All right. Some of you are nodding your head. You probably do the same thing. You look at the apps and you've got two choices: an app that has 43 people that downloaded it, an app that has 43 million. Well, you grab the one with the 43 million. Okay. And so, but the app stores, they will tell you they don't necessarily look at security. They look at things like style. They make sure that the code fits with the device, but they don't always look at security. And the way you know this is there's all of these apps that after they've been approved by the app stores, they get pulled. Like there was this one app that I don't know if you guys heard about. Basically, it would find all of the women that were in your geographic location. Okay, it was an app that somebody wrote that what it does using Facebook data, geolocation data, it would literally show you all of women that are within a geographic radius. That was pushed through both app stores, downloaded millions of times before they realized what a security risk and a privacy risk that was, and they got pulled. So the app stores, you can't really depend on them from a security standpoint. And then the last thing I'll give is that, without getting too technical, so we scan for vulnerabilities, and one of the things we look for is when an app's written, a lot of times they encrypt data, but sometimes what happens is it gets stored on your phone temporarily, okay? And we found applications where it had medical information that in the cloud it was encrypted, it got to the phone, and in the application it's encrypted, but it was temporarily storing the information. It was actually an insurance card. It was a picture of your insurance card. It was actually storing it in what's called cache. Okay, and the thing about cache is, if you're going to write a rogue app, the first thing you do is you write it to look at the cache because you want to get all the data from the other apps. And so basically any other app out there was going to have access to your medical insurance card that was being stored in a secure manner in your healthcare app, but it wasn't being stored well on your phone. So
a comment on what Vinny just said on the mobile app side is a lot of these states now are jumping into this area of mobile app security and privacy gardens, I guess is what guidance, whatever you want to call it. And they're requiring companies, if they have a mobile app, to have a privacy policy embedded in it.
Yep.
And if you look at your kids' mobile apps that they're using, or just the mobile apps on your phone, very few we find truly have a privacy policy embedded in the mobile app. In California, we'll find you like $3,000 per download. I think they came after Delta Airlines for 1 million downloads for a mobile app that didn't comply with them. It's big money for state attorney generals. So that's another major risk on the horizon that we're starting to pay attention to. What happens in California, all of a sudden you see Massachusetts trying it and Vermont trying it, because they're all looking to kind of make a statement on security and privacy. The other thing about the mobile app side and the legal liability side is there's a law called COPA, Children's Online Protection Act. And again, that law specifically says, it was updated last summer, says you have to have not only a privacy policy in there, but you actually have to get opt-in from the parents in a very specific way. And to the point where it says in the law, you might need to fax the parents. It could be that hard. And so we think the plaintiff lawyers, that's another area, and the regulators are going to pay attention to, just to increase the liability around mobile apps beyond just the security. George, on mobile apps, has Comcast got any? I know I have a couple of mobile apps from Comcast to watch videos and.
Yeah, there's the home security, there's the TV to go apps. We go through an extensive process internally with these apps. We have, number one, we educate our developers. That's real big. You have to educate your developers. These aren't just web apps and your traditional applications. You've got to give them specific mobile security training and tools even to do self-assessment. We have a lot of security professionals within the company. I can't say a lot, but enough. But we can't get to everything that's being developed. So we give them the skill set that they will require in order to assess that, give us a firm report before we go into change control process and actually throw that into production. But we go into the user interface security concepts. We look at the data inputs. We look at the authentication mechanisms in use. We then go underneath and do source code reviews as well. We do API checks, error checks, all those things in a very detailed manner in order to ascertain whether the application is sufficient enough to be placed into the production environment for our subscribers and our internal users.
Do you catch a fair amount of stuff?
We do. There's vulnerabilities. And I don't think there's one app that comes through that cycle without catching some level of vulnerabilities. We try to make sure that we fix those things before they make it to production. And the key thing is, don't do those checks just during that initial phase and then it gets deployed. You have to continuously do pen testing and other verification checks of your mobile apps downstream 6 months, a year, 2 years. You have to continue the program in order to ensure that you're not bringing in other mechanisms. And I'll mention one more thing. When we deploy mobile apps, we try to sustain a similar security posture that we have with traditional
that's good.
Architectures. We have the logging, we have the IPS, DLP infrastructures baked in somewhere along the path of where that data streams through.
I guess the challenge, though, is everybody wants the mobile app to be so quick and easy, though. I just want to click on a button, I'm in. Even me, who are paranoid about security, sometimes I just want to click on it and be in. And
well, performance is a big part of our testing. We have to make sure that while you implement security controls, that you never impact the performance of an application and the user experience.
Brian, banking, I know they're going heavily into mobile apps for this, that, and the other. Vinny's addicted to Amazon. I'm probably addicted to PayPal with that eBay, using it. So easy, so great. Tell me about what you're seeing in
One
banking.
point I want to jump off of Vinny is people don't consider is the physical security elements as well.
Yeah.
I was in charge of physical security for the bank, and it's the irony of banking is we put the most trust in the lowest paid under intelligent people and tellers all the time. So I would have frequent conversations with 18-year-olds after they tell me how they went out drinking the night before about physical security, and they're checking in from their phone. So I said, guys, do you realize if I'm going to rob the bank and I know anything about you personally, I know where you are. Either I'm going to go to the bar and beat you up, or I'm going to go to the bank when I know you're by yourself, complaining about working by yourself, checking in that time. So those are some elements, and who has kids in the security profession, they hate me. My kids hate me because I beat them up on this all the time. Everything's scrutinized because you don't want to sleep on it once you get a little glimpse of behind the curtain of these things. But like checking out, my daughter used to do it constantly. I said, do you realize I can track where you are, even on Facebook? Some friends of mine, they're addicted to Facebook, and they're putting in where they are, what they're doing. Guys, you gotta stop that. You're telling people you're on vacation in Disney World. I'm pretty sure I can go to your house and rob it and get back before you get back and tell I'm there. So this.
I used to tweet one day late where I was.
I told them to do the same.
Tomorrow you'll see a tweet about me being here, but
Put your picture up a week after you get back. But on the banking side of apps, I read, and maybe Vinny can validate this. I read an article the other day that in banking it's the multi-factor authentication. Of the apps that do that, it was that 70% did not support two-factor authentication right out of the box. It had to be modified. And then 40% of the apps in this one survey accepted SSL certificates from anybody, uncertain, no secret authority.
Yeah, those are two great examples because when you're writing an app, you're trying to write it for convenience. And so Brian hit two really nitty gritty details that like George's team and those layers, like those are the things that he'll pick up that a lot of other people won't, which is when you're a developer, you're writing the app to make it easy for somebody. So you say to yourself, okay, this is a great security practice. I'm going to make it easy on the person by making it an automatic yes. And those are the types of things that happen, with apps. I mean, those are, two great points.
The other problem we're seeing is you can have all the security you want, but there's the man in the middle, and I brought a toy with me today to show you. You guys are familiar with the Pineapple device? These are really cool if you're a tech guy, but for $100, I can buy a device that will automate a man in the middle attack and defeat anything you got security-wise, no problem. I tested on my own bank account. It actually works. Essentially how this works is I connect one radio, the two different radios in here. I connect one radio to a legitimate source. I connect another radio to advertise like I'm a hotspot for your cell phone.
Like Starbucks, we were down
there. Yeah, I was trying to explain the market before we got here so you understand what we're talking about. But the gist of it is, I want to pretend to be something you trust without questioning it. And Starbucks is a good one. I was out at RSA, I think it was out there. The gentleman did the same thing. He pretended to be AT&T Wi-Fi, which is default for every AT&T phone out there. And it's designed to reply back and create a connection and then strip out your SSL keys, your passwords, your bank account information, and it works without me touching. I literally checked a couple boxes off, let it run, and it captured everything I did across it. Because once I make the connection on both sides, everything's passing through it, and I'm pulling it down. It works really, really well. But if I don't know if I keep their Wi-Fi on all the time when they're walking around, probably you think they turn Wi-Fi off? We were talking about this earlier. Wi-Fi is always
I'm
asking.
turning mine off right now.
This is not plugged in, by the way, or turned on, so you're safe. There is a battery pack. I bought the bonus edition, comes in this little bag, and it tells you. If I'm going to go stealth, I'm going to pull this off. Now you don't know, but there's a battery in here. I can plug it in. I could hit a couple dip switches. I can leave this bag here and come back 2 days later and collect all, pop the memory card out, and I have my field day with all your information. But what this plays off of is that trust factor that Vinny had alluded to. And if you sign for Wi-Fi wherever you go, your phone's asking to connect to that Wi-Fi all the time. So not only am I going to learn about, or pretend to be somebody you're wanting to connect to, but I can learn about you, where you work. You may ask for Drexel Wi-Fi. Oh, I know that Vinny works at Drexel now because I see his phone's asking for it. So if I'm trying to profile him for an attack on a different level, maybe phishing or something like that, I can learn that just by planting one of these devices things. But for $100, and I literally, anybody here, I was going to say my daughter could do it. She's 13. You just turn it on and you hit yes 3 times and it goes. It starts collecting, and it's just how strong the antennas are is how much data you can collect.
Can I buy that on Amazon?
Hold on, I'll buy it for you. But these are the tools. We saw a really cool robot downstairs that had circuit boards in it. They're modular. There's things like Arduino and things like that are out there. These circuit boards they can be programmed to attack. And this frustrates me. I'm sure these guys can relate to that. We have, Vinny talks about the fence for the rabbits. We got some pretty cool fences out there, and you're trying to, keep all the bugs, bunnies out you want. The fact of the matter is, education, it really comes down to a kid checking in wrong, or sometimes I've seen executives. We saw a pen test one time where an executive, he got pretty mad that we found this, but he was the problem how they broke into a pen test because he was sloppy on how he handled his credentials and things like that. That just goes around everything that we built. I mean, I'm sure George, you have that whole SOC. One user could break down the whole thing just by clicking on something wrong, or clicking on a phishing email, or on the phone, or giving some credentials out. Now you're going to bypass all that cool logging and things like that to break in and steal whatever you're trying to get at. It's extremely frustrating.
Well, don't just scare them. Like, what can if everybody has the iPhone, what can they do?
Well, turn your Wi-Fi off first of all.
Yeah.
I was telling Mark earlier, there's an app that'll actually geo-detect where you are and turn Wi-Fi on and off based on where you are. I mean, we fight that battle on banking, like we mentioned earlier about convenience. You don't want to. Wi-Fi's great. You need to use it, but you got to be smart about it. And there's apps to help do that. But it's really awareness. I mean, I found a lot of the aha moments, I'll say, when I talk to bank presidents or even some tech guys that think they're geniuses, but they're missing on these things, is that awareness. You got to educate your users, understand this is what you're up against. When I first started out in security, you had to work at it. You you had to bust into stuff. You had to listen, do some captures, packet captures, and break down and look at payloads and stuff. Not anymore. You have Kali Linux. You have these kind of tools that are embedded. They're push button attacks and things like that. You really got to pay attention, understand what you're up against, and then educate your users. Not doing stupid things like checking in or whatever. You turn your Wi-Fi off. So, my message to everybody is always, after I scare them to death by showing them this, and they glaze over until I show them this, and they come back to reality.
Yeah,
The security guys, that there's a budget out there for a reason. As a tech guy, if you give me a budget, I'm going to spend it. Yeah, I get that. But there's some balance we have to find. That says, listen, you got to get some the right posture in place. Otherwise, some kid's going to walk up to your bank and steal somebody's account, and you're in big trouble after that.
Yeah, I mean, Brian raises a lot of good points, and I think the one thing that I would add is, so I tend to believe that mobile devices like tablets and phones are actually more secure than laptops. Okay? And the reason why I say that is, on your laptop, you store a lot of information. You store spreadsheets. If you work in an industry where there's a lot of sensitive information, like maybe you're at a university and you've got data on all your students. I used to work at a university, and so we used to have some interesting breaches, and so so the thing is on your laptop you store a lot of information. On a mobile device, most of the well-written apps actually don't store much on the devices. They really store them all in the cloud. Okay, and that's why when you talk about cloud and mobile, you have to interchange them, because all of the things I'm doing on here are really being done somewhere else. And the good thing is you've got somebody like George and his team that operates on the assumption that, okay, that guy with the iPhone, he's an idiot. So we have to have an entire team that's going to address the fact that what he's doing is just stupid at times. Okay, and that's the benefit. When you're walking around with a laptop, if you're doing dumb things with your laptop, your security team can't help you. And so that's why I tend to think that these devices are good. But Brian raised a really good question. This is kind of what I want to give you things to do, okay? Which is, it's all about access. Once you're in your phone and you're authenticated, then there's all this information that you have access to. So that's why having a phone that doesn't have a passcode to get in, number one, no. Put a pin in, and don't do your birthday. Don't do 1, 2, 3, 4. I think the number one password out there is 1, 2, 3, 4.
4 or 5.
Yeah, something like that. And don't do easy passwords. Do difficult passwords. What I used to do is I used to use other people's passwords. I would pick people that were just random people on the street. I used to go into offices all the time, and what do people do with their passwords? They put it on a yellow sticky note. And so I would look, and when I'd see someone's password, I thought, that's a good password. I'd write it down, and I'd use it. And, because it had nothing to do with me. It might have been somebody else's birth date and their kid's name, but it wasn't mine, And so, using, like, password devices and things. Then what he said is, hey, if you don't need to be on a Wi-Fi, turn it off. Yeah. Cut off access to your device. Those types of things are really wise.
So I want to just pivot to a little bit different topic here. When I talked to George, I met him on the phone. I was talking to him, asking him, like, what does he like? What's he interested in? And he mentioned information sharing as a topic among security professionals, which is I was blown away even to hear that, George, honestly. And I'll tell you why. So when we do an assessment on a company, towards the end of the assessment, we get into what keeps you up at night, Mr. CIO, and tell me about past events that you had. And 9 times out of 10, they admit to, I would say 99% of the companies have had something happen last year, if not then the year before. It's just a matter of severity of what it is. So we love to learn during these assessments, tell me about all the bad things that happened to you, and then also tell me about the remediation things you put in place. So it's kind of, for us, it's like a little bit of a sharing going on there, but they're kind of compelled to do that because of their insurance company. Recently, we were talking to some guys in the White House who are very concerned that the infrastructure companies in this country do not have proper cyber liability insurance coverage in place. And how do we go about correcting that? And this is the biggest topic, is sharing. The actuaries, the people who support the insurance companies need some information. And you said there's a benefit to this, in sharing information intelligence. Can you speak to that, George?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. One thing for sure, and I hear all good things from my counterparts here up at the panel, I'm sure all you guys are doing a lot of good things within your own security programs, security awareness, you have your preventive detective controls. But no matter what, there is no 100% guaranteed security. There's ways to bypass just about everything. And certainly what you consider secure today over the passage of time will change. I see it every day. That's what I've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years of my career as incident response. So I see all the different ways of how people have bypassed the controls. So there's two key things that we're working on and trying to participate more in to get even better at getting around those corners because there's no 100% security. One of them is obviously information sharing. To me, that's key. There's no way, the bad guys are always talking, they communicate, they sell information to each other. Then we, in the public and private sector, need to be working together to share timely information, actionable information. My team leads a specific security intel arena under the National Cable Telecommunications Association, NCTA, where the cable companies have come together, our legal departments have come up with what can we share, how do we exchange information, what can we share downstream after I pass information along. But that alone for our industry has been magnificent. We get timely information about new threats that are hitting the shores of other cable companies. We do the same for them. We share information on our mitigation strategies. Hey, this thing worked for me, or I tried this one ACL and I tried this other mechanism and that didn't work. You might want to try something else. We exchange that information in a timely manner. We do it via email, phone calls, and we use Sticks and Taxi. I don't know how many have heard of that, but those are transport and information sharing forums that the Department of Homeland Security has been putting out there. My team is helping build some of that right now. So that's one key area. And because I know that everything can be defeated, we now are going in big into big data, statistical data modeling, user behavior modeling. We know that somewhere along the line, somebody's credentials have been captured, someone is probably pivoting around our network. We come into work, I have a specific sub-team of my organization that comes in to work every day with the assumption we're already hacked. No matter all the defenses, all the monitoring that we do, we're already hacked. There's someone inside doing something. So we want to now do a lot of data modeling on our users' behaviors. When someone is logging in at 2 o'clock in the morning and they've never done that over the course of whatever we're trending, whatever period, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, we would know and we would want to get an explanation as to what happened there. When folks are accessing systems they've never accessed before with their credentials, we would know and we would follow up on that. You have to get very granular and very detailed nowadays to defend your networks, and that's what we're trying to do. Definitely information sharing is big. I like to hear what anyone else in the room is doing. I hear the financial industry is far along in that space. I'd like to talk to some of them because I think that's going to be big for all of us to defend our
The
networks.
folks who don't want to share, what would be their reasons for that? Just they're embarrassed that something happened to them, or I mean, what would be?
It could be that, and obviously the lawyers. I know when we went through, and we do it with the Department of Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies, the lawyers always get involved, and you always have to make sure that they're happy with the type of information that you're sharing. Where does it go? How does it get classified? All that's important, and then some companies have to get past that hurdle in order to get involved.
Vinny, can you speak to Verizon? They own Terramark. They own a lot, just as much as Comcast. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think we participate in all the appropriate work groups, that George was mentioning, and it's a tough, from a branding perspective. There's a lot of concern about information that gets out. So within small communities and groups, it makes sense to do that, and simply because that's what the attackers do. A lot of hackers, they have their own communities, they have their own bulletin boards. I think the target attack was written by a guy in one of the Eastern European countries, and that the code was available for lots of people to use. You could buy it for, a certain amount. So, and from a defense standpoint, you have to do that. I know that a lot of our security professionals, interface with others. I have a small group of people that I talk to where we share information, what's going on, things like that, and I mean, you have to do it. You have to have a network of peers where you can talk about what you're doing. And
final topic I want to touch on, because I was getting 8 zillion questions 2 weeks ago, and I know Brian, you were too, on Heartbleed. So all the Lloyd's of London guys are calling us, the underwriters across the country. 20% of companies possibly were were open to the Heartbleed exploit. So they're worried about 8 zillion lawsuits coming in because of that. That's one of their worries. So we're trying to study the issue. I'm sure you've gotten questions from the banking sector on that. Can you share? I mean, my understanding is there wasn't as many major companies using the open SSL that was really, susceptible. But can you talk about what you're seeing out there?
Sure. But before, on the sharing, don't forget InfraGard too. Shameless plug.
Yeah.
I'm a 10-year member of InfraGard. It's a group. Every FBI headquarters in every city has a group that get together, and there's multiple sectors they cover. I highly encourage you to get involved for your particular sector. It's great to give back. You get involved in some projects. You get to see some of the problems that law enforcement has and the government has. We worked on a project where the FBI and the Secret Service were working on it, but they couldn't be in the same room at the same time when we talked about it. It was the most annoying thing on the planet. So we went down to D.C. in this project. We go to the FBI building, to be to drive over to the Secret Service building, and they couldn't be in the same room. We're so much better now because of the threat, and programs like InfraGard are free. On the pay side, there's the ISACs, like there's a financial services ISAC. There's an ISAC for every industry. It costs a couple bucks, but the information is extremely timely and very, 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 very valuable. I'd highly encourage getting involved there. Great stuff. I can talk in a whole another hour and a half on that if you guys want to.
And real quick on InfraGard, Brian was kind enough to get me involved in that years ago. I don't know, almost 10 years ago when I met you. The Philadelphia chapter is super active. They meet a lot down near like the Federal Reserve Building down in Philadelphia. And it seems like every month or quarter that some major company donates a space to them, and they have 300-400 people show up for these conferences to share information and talk about issues. In fact, Brian invited me to do one at Pfizer coming up sometime in June. I'm going to be on a panel with John Mullen, a lawyer who deals with data breach events constantly.
It's a great way to build contacts. It's all about who you know, not what you know. If I know George is part of the group, I can call him. InfraGard, you have to do a little basic criminal background check, make sure you're not an obvious criminal.
Yeah, you get a security clearance too, so.
No, it's just to make sure you're not an obvious criminal. You can still sneak by that thing technically. But if I know George and I are basically at that level, then I can ask him a question and say, hey, I got this problem. Because as bankers, we don't trust anybody, not even ourselves. So, but if I know there's a barrier that's down, I can call him up. Or if I actually have a problem, you get to know the FBI agents or law enforcement or the state police, and by name, hey, I got this problem. You can help me out. I'm in big trouble. I got a breach, whatever. So, it's really a great opportunity to get out there, and then you kind of get scared as to what's out there and learn about it. But at least you can react to it before it attacks you. But to Heartbleed, the vast majority, banks outsource everything, so they're pooled resources typically. So if I'm a bad guy, I'm not going to attack a community bank. I'm going to attack Fiserv or Harlan Financial because I know they got 300 banking customers. If I can break into that. So on the Heartbleed side, I'm going to look for that. And everybody understand how Heartbleed worked. I mean, it's kind of techie, but there's an advertisement like a keep alive for a connection, a heartbeat, if you will. And what the guys figured out that you could do is you could send back a fake message to a vulnerable system and ask for a chunk of memory on one of those heartbeat messages and piece together what was processed on that computer at that particular time. So if it's a banking computer, for instance, or a mobile app or internet banking, and somebody just logged in, to handle that login, they got stored in memory temporarily to handle it and get you in there. But they might not clean out memory right away. So if I can do that multiple times and I can put together your credentials, now I can log in as you, and I don't have to worry about it. And that's the really bad part about Heartbleed. And it kind of bled information out. So there's the heartbeat that bleeds information, if that makes sense to you. But we found is the vast majority of banks were not affected, fortunately, which is nice. And there's some specialty apps were kind of startup companies because they tend to have more open source software as opposed to the old school Fortran mentality we have with most of our old vendors now. For those of us who know what Fortran is. But they patched that stuff fairly quickly. The risk, though, is it's been out there for 2 years.
Yeah.
You don't know how things goes. What the FDIC and such advertises, listen, change your passwords, whether you're affected or not, because you just don't know if you're compromised. As a bad guy, and I'm sure these guys can speak to it as well, I'm not going to capture information and use it right away. I'm going to wait till you get comfortable and then steal it from you when the defenses are down. Right? All this Heartbleed stuff, I'm not going to do it now because you're looking for it. I'm going to wait till the Heartbleed dies down and something the next shiny object I can focus on. Then I'm going to take that information and break in whatever I got. So, but it's kind of scary, but the community banks just aren't equipped to wrap their brain around that stuff, and they glaze over too much. And I think it's troubling. Now, I could put it in the best English I can to raise awareness on it, but you're still, it's.
And forensically, you can't prove or disprove that it ever happened.
Because I'm logging as you. I'm not trying to break into anything. So there's no overflows or anything. If you're familiar with that.
And that's not even really a zero-day attack, but I guess it was characterized in some way like that.
To George's point, when you modify software, this is part of SOX regulations too, by the way. You got to reevaluate each time you make a change to it. And George made a great point there. I mean, if you don't, a patch to a system could change the posture of that security like that, and that's you got to reevaluate it. And the external auditors pick up on that, and they beat it into your head that you got to make sure your change controls process is in place and it's solid. You got to understand what that patch you're putting on your banking system does, or you could expose yourself to a hard bleed or whatever. I mean, there's been a ton of SSL type attacks now because of it. People are figuring, hey, if I can break into this is pretty good. So you got to pay attention to that. You got to have a process in place. You got to have some risk management oversight to that as well. Any new change in the system, whether it be cloud-based or not, even internal, could present the same kind of problem to you. And we're finding that finally the regulators are starting to ask that question and force you to look that way and think that way, which we hadn't done in the past.
It seems like these zero-day sort of national exploits, pop up every 6 months or so. Remember Target had the big breach, and they're calling it something that has to do with memory, the RAM scraper. And I was just recently interviewing Verizon's cybersecurity computer forensic team, and they're kind of endorsed by Visa to do PCI investigations on any kind of credit card breach. And it's shocking to know that the PCI standard that all these retailers abide by actually really doesn't address this exact exploit, how it happened, where the bad guy was capturing credit card data when it's non-encrypted in this tiny piece when it's running through the memory there in a split second. And even if you have something in place called point-to-point encryption, that doesn't even solve the problem because it still has to run through the memory unencrypted. So it's just,
I mean, that's a great point, Mark. I said this earlier, is if you're a small business, right, if you're a small company, a security standard like PCI or HIPAA or one of the SOX standards, it'll be challenging for you to meet initially. But the thing you have to realize about that is you have to look at security from beyond just from a compliance standpoint, okay? And the reason why you have to do that is he gave a great example. If you're an attacker, you're going to want to find out what the bare minimum people do because they need to be PCI compliant. So when you design your attack, if you find a vulnerability or something that isn't covered under that standard, for a majority of the people out there, it's going to be useful. Okay, and so a lot of hackers do research. Okay, whenever a vulnerability, let's talk a little bit about XP, right? So XP is no longer supported by Microsoft. Okay, so if I'm an attacker, what I'm going to do is anytime Microsoft puts out a new release of security vulnerabilities for all their operating systems, I'm going to look at that as my blueprint for attacking XP devices because I know that those same holes are going to probably be in the older devices, and I know no one's fixing those. Okay, so I'm going to catalog, search the internet, find all the areas where I can get to an XP machine, and then every time Microsoft puts out a list of vulnerabilities, I'm going to go try those out on those devices. And so what we're trying to communicate here is that you have to look at security. You have to build it into when you're developing apps. You have to look at it when you're looking at vendors, and you can't just look at it from a compliance standpoint. You can't say, are you HIPAA compliant or are you PCI compliant? You want to find out from the vendor you're working with is, okay, I know you're HIPAA compliant, I know you're PCI compliant, but what else do you do? Those types of things.
So I want to wrap this up now in like a minute. Just a final thought. I'm going to ask each of these guys for a 15-second final thought, but one of the things I just wanted to bring to your attention, the thing to look at the next year or two especially, the hot area that we see growing is not necessarily always a security-based breach risk, but something called wrongful data collection liability. That's really the intentional act of your marketing departments and companies collecting private information, whether through leaking apps or whatever it is, and building profiles on you and I. And your privacy policy basically doesn't say you're doing that, so plaintiff lawyers saying deceptive trade practice. and these are turning into massive, massive class actions for companies across every sector. And it's the hot area that all the attorney generals are looking for. So it's just something to pay attention to. It just kind of fits under the theme of cyber risk, the leaking of data that we talked about. I'll start with Brian. Brian, any kind of parting words in 15 seconds for?
I'm going to echo what George said. Get involved, share information. These are great events. In that regard, find whatever that channel is and get to know some people that are smarter than you, which has saved me more than a few times. I can't say that. I mean, I'm going to call George up now. He's up the street from me, works for me, so I'm going to bug in now for some stuff. I mean, that is the key to success. A lot of these things, and the battling things that you don't know about. I mean, you get on the heartbeat side. I mean, I'm not a zeros and ones guy, but maybe somebody his team is. So get involved, absolutely. George.
Yep. From my perspective, I gain a lot coming to these sessions from the audience as well. So I definitely would like to get some of your contact information if you guys want to exchange that, because I want to ensure that my folks are talking to you guys or myself directly in some cases, sharing information, talking about what the direction of cybersecurity is going and how we can make it better for all of us.
Ben?
So I'll leave you with just two thoughts. One, for your personal lives, focus on authentication, which is use good passwords, add additional layers, make your life a little bit harder just to help yourself. And then the other thing I would say is encryption, okay? Encrypt everything, everywhere, at all times. Study encryption, learn about it, hire people who know about it, but encrypt all of your data. And I'll just leave it at that.
And I mentioned my claims study a couple times. I'm willing to give it to anybody who wants it. I'll give it to Norm. You contact Norm and he can pass it to anybody if you're interested in seeing what losses the insurance industry is seeing across the board, large and small. And Norm,
Yeah, just give them a big hand. I think.